I feel like I'm under.
This is my interview of you.
What the hell?
Well, you wore the jacket. I'm asking the question.
No one's ever actually asked the origins, but I'm glad you're that research. That's an exciting sort of start to this.
Very good.
So, Ryan, absolute pleasure to have you on the Filmmakers Podcast.
Oh, thank you.
We are a filmmaking podcast, so we talk filmmaking process, all the sort of fun stuff. And as a filmmaker, it doesn't get much more exciting than watching House of Dragons. Those first 4 episodes were, absolutely nail-biting and deeply impactful. So, huge congratulations for a start.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's very nice to hear.
So how are you feeling about the whole thing? I mean, you're here in London, you're doing junkets. There's a very big setup here. It's obviously a nice time in your career. So, how are you feeling about the whole thing?
Yeah, it's all like... I think this all kind of blew past me in season 1 for a host of reasons. And not that I didn't enjoy it. I just think it was all happening at once in a way. And I've been showrunning now for the better part of 10 years. But I will tell you that my previous show never had a launch or anything resembling anything that's gone on for either season 1 or season 2 of House of the Dragon. So I think that was all kind of new to me. And at this time I just made the pledge to myself to be a little bit more present throughout it and to take it in and enjoy it, because so much of this job is just work, day to day, and it's a job.
Yeah,
and it's a fun job most of the time. But this is the part where you get to celebrate all the great work that everybody did going into this, and we have a crew of 2,500 people. And these amazing artisans across every discipline that goes into making television. That part I've been able to enjoy much more here. And we're in London right now. This is the fun one because it's the home, sort of the home release. So you get to see a lot more people at the event than you would in the other cities where we take it around, because most of the people that make the show either live here or are a short train ride away from here. So that'll be very nice. And being able to launch it into the world this week, I'm looking forward to all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, what were some of the changes going from season 1 to season 2? I mean, let's put you in the mindset. You finished season 1. You've had maybe some kind of inverted commas break. You probably didn't get much of a break.
No.
What are you looking at feedback? Are you looking at how are we going to adapt the next thing? What did we like? What didn't we like from the first season? How are we going to sort of progress these characters through? And you're obviously going into the casting for second season as well. Like, how was that kind of process from first season to second season? Because I think that's really interesting stuff.
It's actually a fairly big shift, just because season 1 we made entirely during COVID. I mean, we started filming before there was a vaccine. I mean, the vaccine existed, but nobody had it. So to go from that shift to making season 2 on its own is a huge thing. I mean, there were so many jokes in season 2 about, I've never seen the lower half of your face, because you spent a year with this crew working side by side, and all you saw was their eyes, peering at you as though we were all ninjas, which was fun. And if you imagine that version of the show, it's quite fun. So there was that kind of big shift.
House of Ninjas could be a side project.
I'm in. Let's chat after the podcast. But I think it's the difference between making something in a vacuum, and I think COVID sort of enhanced the vacuumness of making a season 1, and then making something that has landed with an audience, and also normalcy sort of returned to film production. So all at once, it just felt very much like you'd gone from this kind of monastery you're deep in the mountains to now suddenly you're standing in a city square and doing the same job again, but knowing that you're making it for people who are fans. And we actually had a lot of the crew return from season 1, but of course you have new crew, and then you have crew who've come who are fans of the show, who are just excited to this is the throne room and it's so amazing. So to get to enjoy and see all of that stuff, I think the second go around was really satisfying. But in terms of absorbing everything from the outside world, I don't think it changed anything that we were doing. Certainly, it's impossible not to be aware of it.
Yeah.
But I think the advantage of the way we make this show is that we're always doing things well in advance of when people are seeing them. So by the time season one was released, we had written much of season 2 already.
Oh, great.
Because you just have to keep the train moving. So I think in a good way, it didn't really affect what we were doing with season 2. We were just trying, we were our bar for season 2, the writers and then the folks at HBO and everything that goes into the making of a season.
I feel like that's what makes the best work. I think when you try and listen to outside opinions, you're kind of, you're looking at something outside of what you're all there to do, which is for everyone to be focused on making an amazing story and amazing characters and amazing cast. And I think when you focus on that side of things, that's when the magic happens, for sure.
Yeah. And we it's impossible not to hear the noise. It exists. It's all around us. But I'm not I disconnected myself from social media at the beginning of getting this job just because I didn't want that to be a voice in the process. And I also wanted to free up as much time as possible to make the show and to spend time with my family. So yes, we've tried to pursue the show in as pure a creative driven way as possible, I guess is the best answer.
So was there any sort of script style changes going forward? Maybe even just as you were getting to the end of season 1, that you were thinking, okay, these are some things we want to focus a little bit more on in the second act of this season, or were you thinking, okay, production wise, maybe we can expand things because we're out of COVID, we can get a lot more location shooting? I mean, what were those kind of considerations from the script and?
We definitely wanted to expand the world more, and I think being out of COVID certainly helped because everything was a challenge there. And but it was more of, we were at that point in the story where the world naturally expands. I mean, really the same way the original Game of Thrones did. The first season is about kind of setting the pieces on the board, and all the Starks are still living in Winterfell and at home, and then they all travel to King's Landing together. But then these horrible things happen and everybody gets scattered and sent to the wind to either, raise armies or because they're on the run. And although our story is very different, a similar sort of dynamic happens at the end of season 1. We find ourselves literally on 2 different islands. One's an island in Dragonstone and the other is a coastal city in King's Landing. And the 2 sides of the family have been divided and set in these different places. There's not going to be a lot of crossover anymore. And it means we're going to follow these individuals that we spent all of season 1 setting up out into the world, which means new locations, certainly new dragons. Adventure, exactly. Heightened stakes. I mean, I think we come into season 2 where the stakes are much higher. Yeah. Season 1 was very much about who's going to marry who and is it a boy? when many childbirths have been filmed. Yeah. But now it's war, and which army is going to decide for us, and is this dragon going to survive, and those sorts of things that come into the equation when you're talking about an act of war, which we've seen kick off at the end of season 1.
Yeah. So, I mean, tonally, House of Dragons is a really interesting one for me. I loved Game of Thrones. I thought, all of it was fantastic, and I was really excited to sort of see how House of Dragons was the same but different. I think one of the things I really like, because I'm a sort of drama fan, is, to me, it feels like maybe it's a mixture of the writing and the show running and the characters, but it feels like the balance between all of the sort of the crazy messed up stuff that happens in medieval lands versus the sort of the warmth of the characters and those interpersonal relationships. I feel like there's a lot of warmth coming through in the series, and especially in series 2. Especially the 2 sort of lead princesses, like that kind of interpersonal relationship. So, was there ever conversations sort of going into House of Dragons about setting the tone differently? Was that a conscious decision from you, or from setting yourself aside from Game of Thrones, making it in the same world but slightly different, or was that kind of a happenstance of some of the casting and the way that the scripts were sort of coming together?
I think it's a natural. I think there is a shared tone across both series. Yes, because of the nature of the story that's being told and the period of time that it's taking in, and it being coming from the same source material. But I think the challenge with this particular story is, because this is such a bleak period in the history, is to try to find those moments of humanity within. And this isn't this is a civil war that in many ways precipitates the end of the Targaryen dynasty, even though it takes many decades to come from here. This is the thing that kind of
catalyst. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a catalyst, and it hamstrings them in such a way that it does eventually lead to their end. These are just very dark things that we're dealing with. So you have to find ways to populate it with human beings. There's nobody in this story that from day one is setting out of like, yeah, I'm going to burn the kingdom down and it's all going to come to an end. I think they're individual characters making decisions in the moment, sometimes for pure moralistic reasons, other times for self-centered and but possibly amoralistic reasons.
Yeah.
But the idea is that it's all populated by humans, and they have faults and flaws and strengths and weaknesses. And each, I think hopefully every character in the series has some humanity or empathy that we can hang our hat on. Even the darkest character, even Aemond, Aemond One Eye, who is probably the classic villain in this series. We've seen him as a child, when he had 2 eyes and no dragon, grow up. So at the very least, even if you don't like what he's become as an adult, you hopefully empathize with him because you saw what he was as a child and you understand why he became what he became.
And also, I thought it was very interesting how he was sort of mistreated by some of the other characters, like Aegon. As there's a certain moments where he's
his own brother.
His own brother sort of it makes fun of him, and that actually gives him humanity as well, which is kind of interesting how you sort of use some of the not villains but like slightly villainous trait characters to then humanize the other characters. So I mean, what is the process of doing this kind of multi-crew kind of script process when there's so many moving parts? I mean, when you first kind of came across House of Dragons, how does that process work with HBO and yourself?
Yeah, it's very complex, no surprise. I mean, we built on, I think, the great methodology that David and Dan created, I think, out of necessity on the original series. So we shoot everything out of order. Everything is, we call it, block shot. So you're kind of grouping sets and locations together versus shooting episode 1 in continuity, which is what we would have done on my previous series. You shoot episode 1 and then episode 1 goes and gets cut while you're shooting episode 2. It sort of goes like that.
Yeah, like a moving train sort of thing.
Exactly. But this, in the first week on the show, we were shooting scenes from the finale, just because the nature of where we were and what set we were filming on and things like that. So it's incredibly complex. You have 2 units running at the same time almost every day. So you have a fire unit and a blood unit, and that's not first and second unit. Those are 2 first units that are filming with individual directors on separate sets with separate groups of the cast. So you can film something in the Red Keep while you're filming something at Dragonstone, because those are on 2 different stages. Yeah. As long as they're from different episodes, so you have a different director filming each one, and different casts are involved. So that's called tandem shooting. So for us, most of our shoot days are 2 shoot days on the schedule covered at one time, and there's incredible efficiency that comes with that because you're working off the same catering truck, et cetera, et cetera. You're not in 2 locations at once. So there's money to be saved doing that, and also time, which is the big thing, because we have something like 270 shoot days. So if you did that end to end, it would take more than a year to film, one series. And then if you think people are aggravated now about how long it takes for the show to come out, imagine if we were doing it that way. So it just makes for a thing that's incredibly complex and hard to chase around. You have to keep in your head, where are we in the story in this particular set I'm standing on? And all of that comes from being very prepared going into the filming of it. All the scripts have to be done. They have to be screwed down, dialed in, all that before the first day rolls shooting. Yeah. Because that's the only way that you can.
Because if you're sort of changing things on the fly and you've got one actor over here and over there, then you can't just suddenly move people over, switch those kind of scale of production. So what is the actual, the writers, is there like sort of a writers collaboration? Like how does HBO sort of fit into things? What's your personal sort of process in how you like to, approach the writing?
Yeah, I mean, I run a traditional writer's room. We did in season 1, the same in season 2, and now we're already in the early days of season 3. So it's the same. It's the same way. It's a collaboration of writers. You'll see multiple writers credited on the show. At the top of it is myself, and then Sarah Hess, who's an executive producer on the show, and my writing partner. So she is Sarah and I oversee the writing on the show, and we have that goes back all the way to season season 1. I wrote the pilot, and then Sarah got involved once they picked us up to series. And she's tremendous, incredibly talented writer. And I just adore our collaboration together. Yeah. So it's us sort of, running this room, and we break the story together as a collective. Of course, with, me doing the Roman Emperor, yay or nay, thumbs up or thumbs down on a lot of things.
So there's lots of ideas sort of thrown around after you've got the sort of the basic structure.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It's concentric circles of detail. So you sort of start with the big, what's the season arc? Where do we want to begin and end? What are the major set pieces that we're gonna hit from the book in this period? Who are our point of view characters? What are the arcs that we want to send them on? Where do we want to see them begin and end the season? So as you get more and more details painted into that, you can get down to things like, okay, well, what is the big midpoint decision the main character is going to make that's going to vault us into the next cycle of stories? And then eventually you're, okay, what is episode 1? Now that you know where all of these things are going in the distance. Yeah. And you're constantly referring back to the book, because the book is the guideline that sort of beats along the path, trying to hit and tick off as many of those boxes as you go along as you can. And then eventually you're talking about having we use index cards up on a cork board.
Yeah, the classic. Yeah.
And you have your set of index cards that make up episode 1, and then you send that off to outline, and then the writer comes back with an outline. We all review it. Usually Sarah and I are reviewing that. And then that writer gets sent off to script when it's good, and then on and on you go until eventually you have 8 scripts that you're looking at and dealing with in draft form, and then you begin iterating those again and again and again for months, basically up until you start production. But at that point, hopefully you're working on character details and the jeweler's work as we talk about. So all the big production stuff is set. We know what sets we're building. We know what locations we're going to. We know all the characters we have to cast this season. Those big things that really affect the production. So those things are all often working, and we're like, okay, now how do we dial in Egon's arc a little tighter?
Yeah. And HBO, you're putting together the shape of these episodes, and then HBO are having like ideas and thoughts as well, and it's kind of a springboard in that kind of sense.
Yeah, it's a traditional notes process. So we definitely develop the season, and then we pitch it to HBO. They give us feedback, and this is where we're headed, and that tends to be a 30 to 45 minute discussion. They give us feedback based on that, and then we give them more detail as we progress, outlines and scripts, and they give us feedback the entire time. And they're very hands on, but also they less sort of telling us what to do and more of just having a voice in the process. And they are, there are things, of course, we debate, and always will. It's the natural sort of creative process between the show side of the show business and the business side of the show business thing. But no, they're very involved, and they kind of ping pong back and forth between scripts and them, and budget comes into consideration at some point where reality strikes, and things have to be trimmed down or reconceived, or let's not build 2 sets, let's build 1 set and have both of these things take place in this one location, and then on and on you go, and eventually you're making the show.
I mean, it must be nice to work with someone like HBO, because I mean, when you look at sort of prestige drama TV series, they obviously do understand story, which I think is a massive help with any kind of collaboration.
Yes, I mean, yes, for sure. I mean, it's a storied network that's steeped in these. When you make a list of the top 20 television series of all time, many of those are going to be HBO series.
Yeah. So let's go back to the budget side of things, and maybe picking your battles in terms of what you were sort of trying to achieve with season 2, and when you're in the writing and you're thinking, okay, can we do this? Can we do that? What were some of the priorities or challenges that you were sort of looking at, especially for some of the sets and set pieces?
Yeah, I mean, really, you set out with a view. You set out with a view for the season, and I always try to keep in contact with our production team as much as possible through the writing process, so that they have an eye into it, and then they can flag up anything that they think is going to be an outlier or a challenge. I mean, this is an enormously expensive show in time and resources, of course, and we have to deliver on spectacle and expectation, and every season has to give something new and different and more than where we did in the last. So it's a constant push-pull between ambition and reality. So I think in this process, the thing that usually weighs you down most in television is simply just shoot days, because those are very expensive. So the first thing you look for is, how do we get the schedule to fit into the box they've given us, the number of weeks that we want to shoot. And then there are other outliers that the number of locations that you go to, location days are more expensive than set days. And then the enormous cost of construction, because as you've seen, the sets on this show are huge.
Massive,
So whenever you build something, it ends up being, it's my only experience in working in this business where every set I've walked onto, instead of saying, oh, okay, I thought it might be bigger, but we can make this work, to, oh my God, I can't believe how big this thing is. Yeah. And with that comes cost. So it's a winnowing down of these things. And the show will always have huge scope and spectacle, but I think it's when you get into that process at the end, it's eliminating shoot days and figuring out how to get down the number of sets that you're building, the number of locations or location days that you're going to. And those are the things that actually have a fairly big effect fairly quickly. When you get down to, do we really need 3 swords? Can we make do with 2? And that's when you're in a little more trouble. But thankfully, we haven't really gotten there on the show. But it can get down to that in making day-to-day television.
Yeah, I mean, it's all cumulative, and I think that's always the thing. You think about, oh, this, it's going to cost this much for a dragon fighting another dragon, which is probably something that's very important for the series, obviously. But it's the day-to-day, like, do we have an extra 5 extras on day 1 to 4 in 3 different locations, and that all starts to add up, and do we actually need them, and are we shooting in these kind of angles? And I imagine it's like very much a small costs that sort of escalate that needs to be carefully looked at.
Managed across the production. It's very expensive, and as you can see, there's tons of labor that goes into the show. So when you have 100 extras versus 50 extras, those 50 extras, like, yes, you have to pay those people, but that also with them comes makeup and hair and costume, and then all the labor that goes along with that. So those are the big kind of cost centers of the show, and those are the things that you're attacking all the way through. And horse trading, the director saying, can I have more extras here if I can do this a bit quicker? And it's just the nature of making film. But once you're in that pocket where you're doing those things, the overall sort of budget is working. It's getting to that place where you can do the internal horse trading that I think is the biggest challenge.
I was talking to a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and he was saying, like, what day you have the horses is like a really big expense, and you need to really pull your horses together, or dragons in this case as well.
Yes.
So just going back to like how you actually got the call, because I mean, I think that's probably most sort of writers, showrunners' dreams, is to get some kind of call to do a prestige HBO show. What was some of the process that got you to that point, and just that initial sort of
Well, I came at this in a sort of unique way, which is I was a massive fan of George's writing, going back. Now at the time it was like I don't know, 15, 18 years or something. Now it's like almost 25 years.
Wow.
I discovered these books coming right out of university. When I was sort of learning how to become a writer myself, I was trying to figure out my own path. And I was a big science fiction fantasy fan. And this was right around when Lord of the Rings was being released in theaters. And somebody had said to me, oh, if you like Tolkien, you should check this out. It's like the adult version. It's Tolkien with betrayals and nudity and brutal violence.
Yeah.
And I was like, great, cool. So read the first book, hooked in with it immediately, and just devoured what was there. And then they stayed with me for years and years. And certainly as this is long before I've done anything of note professionally as a writer my own, and eventually I broke into writing and was writing movies, and then I got a TV pilot job, and that pilot got picked up to be filmed, and it just happened to land in George's backyard in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Oh wow!
And I knew that he lived there because I was a fan. So I did a little light fan stalking and had mutual acquaintances set us up. And I said, "Can I buy him dinner while I'm in town? I'm going to be here in his backyard for 2 months." And he took me up on the date, and we met up. And I think, I don't know, I think we hit it off. He was very excited that I had brought a television show to his backyard and wanted to come visit it. And I was like, great, cool. So he came to set. Which this was very early days of Game of Thrones, but it was I think the second season was on the air. So he was a known quantity. It's not what it is now, but he was a known quantity. Everybody's very excited. And then we just stayed in touch, and he would come to LA periodically to win Emmys, and he would look me up and catch up with me and say, hey, what's going on, whatever. And then eventually there was we knew that HBO was looking to do a spin-off series or a successor series to the original Game of Thrones, but what do we do, and how do we follow the greatness of the first one and all that? So there's a lot of angst and consternation around that.
Yeah.
And they were developing things. I had conversations with them that didn't really go anywhere. And then further down the road on this particular project, George was sort of unhappy with how it was going, and this was the one that he cared about the most. This is the story I want to tell as the successor series. And he called me up one day, and he was just like, are you available to write a pilot? Which is crazy.
Yeah.
And I, of course, jumped at it and said yes. And then HBO phoned up and said, we're hiring you to write this pilot, which was also crazy because those are the phone calls that happen. You're like, yeah, I'll never hear about that ever again.
Yeah.
And then I did. And then I wrote a pilot. And then kind of 6 months later, we were sitting in a writer's room working on an architecture for the show with a small group of writers to build out the story Bible and what's episode 2 and where do we go from here. And, it was a year, but it sort of, all kind of fell together very quickly. And then one day they phoned up and they said, we're not just going to pilot, we're making a series, which was also crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just came at me in waves, and it's insane. And here we are, 6 years later. It's wild.
I mean, I think it's such a great story about how to network in an authentic way. B, caring about the source material. I mean, I think, some of the best shows, and this included, are ones where you can clearly tell that both the writer of the material originally and the showrunners really do care about what was created as a vision, and they're really working hard to sort of evaluate that.
I mean, I deeply care, and I hope that's the thing that comes through in both these sorts of things, but also in the making of the show. I hope that fans that are familiar with certainly with the books, they see the textual reality that we brought, to the series, the heraldry, the interaction between houses, and all the things that, I think viewers that don't know the books just feel as, oh, okay, that's the brush that they paint the show with to make it feel real and textural, like a real place. But the fans that come in from the outside that know the show see how hopefully true to life and accurate it all is. And that comes from the great love that the show has made. And that starts with me, but also flows down through me to the other writers and to everybody that makes the show.
Yeah, definitely. So just to sort of touch on the cast and your own sort of vision in terms of what you wanted to bring specifically, maybe outside of the source material and your love of Game of Thrones. What was your kind of, if you had one input sort of going into the show?
In terms of cast?
Well, casting as well, but also just your sort of tonal, maybe you had some things that you wanted to maybe inject in your own sort of ideas and feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I was trying to bring the most to it was just this kind of the tonal fidelity to what George had written. And I think we were walking this line between honoring the original series and then also honoring George's voice in the original book. And the original series is very close to it, not to say that it isn't. It's just they kind of did their own thing in terms of making it relevant for television, I guess. And it comes to syntax and all these little details. But that's the thing that I wanted to make to people to feel most when they came to this is this is Westeros. And I think we had the advantage of coming in season 1 with many more resources than David and Dan had when they made their pilot for the show, because it was already an established thing. So we got to bring this really, this wealth and this decadence to this, the technicolor of this kind of medieval world that wasn't really available to them, I think, when they made the pilot. They got to speak specifically to this period in time, because this is the height of the Targaryen dynasty, when they're at their most powerful and their richest, and everything is great and the streets are flowing with gold. And I think the series really felt that. But then on the sort of textural human to human level, when two characters are talking in a room, hopefully the syntax of that interaction feels like it's George's pages come to life.
Definitely. Just to wrap up, if you've got one little bit of advice you could give budding screenwriter / showrunner that we can finish off with.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a long road, but if you really want it, the journey itself should be a reward, and you should just try to enjoy the process. I mean, I came from a place where I always had a day job, so I was always writing at night and on the weekends. And look, it's hard work, and at times it can be depressing and lonely and whatever. I mean, that's the life of the artist. But I think for me, I always enjoyed the process of sitting there and writing. So I think that's the thing to try to find enjoyment in, because if you don't enjoy that, I don't know if the job is ever going to quite be for you. So that was the thing, and also just approach it with sort of honesty and don't be a cynic. And I think it goes back to my first interaction with George. I approached him as a fan. I was not looking for a job or a career or an autograph or anything. I really respected him and the work that he had done, and just wanted to, bend his ear a bit. And eventually, many years later, it led to a job. So I think the purity of that pursuit, I think, has been reflected in my own career. And that's the best thing that I can tell a young budding writer, is just do it for the right reasons.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can't wait to see the rest of the episodes.
Thank you. It was lovely to be here.
Thank you.